Hello again. I'm sure everyone's excited about this next passage. We get to do a really corny passage about hip hop music. Oh boy. All right, this is the last passage in set one of the W. Spring book. And let's get started here with our first question, which is vocab. We'll read our sentence and see if we can get our context. And maybe there's some clues there to help us get the right answer. These days, it's commonplace to hear a minute-long spoken word blank in the middle of your favorite pop song. In the middle of your favorite pop song, a spoken word blank. Well, it's not really an interruption, is it? Because it's like part of the song. Let's find the word that fits. Maybe some of you already know the word for the thing we're looking for is an interlude. Okay, that's the correct answer. An interlude is a thing that is performed in the middle of a musical piece. That's got to be the answer. That's literally what we're talking about. If you were confused by the other answer choices, let's help you eliminate now. An interval is just an amount of time. That doesn't work. A hiatus is a break or maybe a short vacation. Intermission comes pretty close. Maybe some of you were tempted by this one. Now, during an intermission, during a break in between maybe the acts of a play or during a break in the middle of a long movie, there might be an interlude. There might be a song or something like that that's performed during the intermission, but the intermission is the break. The interlude would be the thing that gets performed. Okay, so if you know that word, great. If not, or if you, I don't know, somehow need more examples, leave me a comment or send me an email, and then I'll see if I can explain things more thoroughly. All right, it's pretty straightforward, but maybe this question is once again a little harder than the kind of vocab we often get on the real test, where it's, yes, a word that's literally correct, like we see here, but on real tests, remember, the words are often easier and a little more common than this one. So I would say this is another challenging vocab question, and don't worry too much if you missed it. Great, let's move on to 35. Oh boy, we have an info flow question, so let's go ahead and do what we always do before we look at this stuff over here. Let's just go ahead and read our paragraph, see if we have a complete paragraph already, and then we will read the thing in the middle here and see if that gives us something necessary or gives us something kind of superfluous. Okay, let's read. We've already read our first sentence. We know that it's common to hear a spoken word interlude in the middle of a song. And there's no doubt, there's no question that hip-hop culture has gone global. Let's get some examples of hip-hop culture. Graffiti art. It's moved from the streets of the city to the walls of the museum. Graffiti art, that's part of hip-hop culture. And b-boy dance competitions. They can be found anywhere from London, Tokyo, and everywhere in between. Okay, so spoken word performances and graffiti art and breakdancing. These, I guess, are all aspects of hip-hop culture. Okay, we're going to skip over this sentence for now, and let's move on to the end, and then we'll figure out if we need this blue thing or not. Okay. So remember, b-boy dance and graffiti art is really popular. Those two things are really popular. So it may come as a bit of a surprise to learn that there was a time when lawmakers talked openly about the need to censor or even ban some forms of rap music, hip-hop music. Okay. So it looks like the beginning of the paragraph talks about this thing that's really popular, and this thing down here pivots and says, well, this thing that's popular now actually was really controversial a long time ago. So let's read the thing now here and see if it adds something we want. In other words, rap music and hip-hop culture is now all over the world. Maybe we should have said are, shouldn't we? Well, let's ignore maybe any grammar funniness for now and focus on the info flow here. Maybe somehow this is one collective singular thing. I don't know. Maybe that's a typo that Mr. Reznick made. Let's ignore that and let's figure out what's going on with our info flow. Well, do we want to keep this underlined thing? Does it provide a transition into the ways that hip-hop music has been controversial? Well, no, not at all. That's what the last sentence does. This wrong answer here is actually a pretty common type of wrong answer where instead of describing the underlined thing, choice A actually describes the thing down here. So if you somehow lose your focus during the test and you vaguely remember reading something over here and your answer seems to describe it, be careful, make sure that you're actually describing the underlined section. So no, we don't have a transition into the ways that hip hop and music has been controversial. If you feel like it in your book, you could leave a little note over here somewhere that says next sentence, because it's not the sentence we're focusing on. Let's keep going. B says keep it because it summarizes information in the previous sentences that would otherwise lack clarity and context. Now, that's an interesting choice, and I don't mind admitting to you that what I was doing with B was giving you something that starts off as a good answer. We probably can agree that actually this statement sort of summarizes what we had just set up here. However, if you do read the entire answer choice, the thing that's tempting about the beginning of it might you might not realize that actually there's a problem with our answer. All right, let's keep reading. Focus on the second half of this answer choice and see what it says. It summarizes info that would otherwise lack clarity and context. Well, wait a minute. If we already said hip hop culture has gone global, then haven't we already clearly said exactly that information? Rap and hip hop culture is all over the world. Well, I think we don't actually lack clarity or context. There's really nothing that's particularly unclear about what we have so far. So if anybody did pick B on this one, I would warn you, be very careful when you read the beginning of an answer choice and you start immediately saying to yourself, oh yeah, this is great, this is good, I'm going to pick it. Because there may be something later in the answer choice that makes it wrong or flawed somehow. So remember, it always pays to be calm and careful. Now, does it merely repeat ideas stated elsewhere in the paragraph? Yes, indeed, it does merely repeat. Because if we said it's all over the world and we said that it's all over the world again down here, we're basically just repeating what we've already said. All right, so C is verifiably correct. Maybe this one is a little bit tricky though. Like I said, that tempting part of B may have fooled some of you. But we can see this is our answer even as we're reading D anyway, just to make sure. Does it contradict the claim that hip hop culture is primarily a regional phenomenon? The paragraph certainly never claimed that. So we're going to go ahead and eliminate D. All right, maybe 35 was a little tricky, but be careful. What I was really just trying to remind you to do here when I wrote this question was to not get too excited when you see something that looks like a good answer choice. Make sure you read the entire answer choice and then you pick the one that's most demonstrably correct. Let's continue. All right, 36 is asking us to provide a transition from the end of the previous paragraph to this paragraph that follows. Well, you know our method. We want to be careful. We want to actually read what's in this paragraph down here and then come back up here and read the underlined section. So let's see here. Transition from the end of the previous paragraph. We'll reread the end. We remember what it was about. We introduced the idea that the surprising fact that lawmakers actually talked about the need to censor or possibly ban some types of rap music. Well, let's find out what types of rap music, and let's hear the story about this controversy. So we'll skip choice A for now, and let's just read here. I'm sure that's going to help us with the question we get at the end of the paragraph down here anyway. But let's do that, and I'm sure we'll be able to come up with a good transition. So we've got a blank we're going to ignore for now. Wife of then U.S. Vice President Al Gore was shocked by the sexually explicit lyrics on an album that she bought for her daughter. Mrs. Gore and others started a campaign that resulted in congressional hearings. I guess there's our government, right? Lawmakers, we mentioned up here, remember that? Congressional hearings to examine whether the violence and sex in rap music might be having a bad influence on the nation's youth. On one side, worried about impressionable children. The other claimed it was merely reflecting problems afflicting the nation, particularly the problems in cities that were then suffering from gang violence and police abuse. Okay, and then we probably don't have to read this thing for now. We'll deal with that later. It looks like we are describing the controversy that took place in society, but particularly among people in government, the wife of someone in government, or the members of Congress. Remember these lawmakers who maybe are talking about the need to censor or restrict rap music. Okay, so we mentioned the controversy up here. We described the controversy down here. So when I'm looking at my answer choices, I am immediately noticing this thing that says controversy here. Now, that could be a trap. It seems like a good transition between the stuff up here and what's in this paragraph. So let's make sure that the thing that looks like the answer, which is B, let's make sure that it is the answer. A says hip hop music first began to become a global genre in 1994. Well, that's a nice little chronology clue, but it lacks this controversy thing that we want to explicitly mention. And you know what? So do all the other answer choices. So we're pretty confident. We read slowly and carefully. We know what we're looking for, and it's B. Great. Let's continue. When we do number 37, we can see something that we've actually encountered earlier in this same test. If you go back up to number 14, you'll notice that we encountered a really similar question. Back in that question, we saw a pattern from 9-1. It was some others, and what we're doing here is one side singular and another. Now, just like we did in number 14, here for this problem, we want to check both our parallelism, one side and the other, or another, one side and another, or one and the other, if there are just two things total. But we want to, of course, not just pay attention only to our parallelism, we also want to pay attention to punctuation. Subject, one side, verb, worried, that's an independent clause. The other, meaning the other side, that's a subject. Claimed is a verb. So we have two ICs. We pretty easily spot the punctuation error that we have in A. And I think we notice that we've got punctuation errors in B as well. While, of course, is the beginning of a dependent clause. So we end up with a problem here with our semicolon. We need two ICs. We only have one on the left. C, of course, is our answer. But what's going on with D? Maybe we shouldn't judge so fast. We recognize in choice D something that we learned way back, of course, in lesson 2. This is a 2-3 sentence. We've got an IC followed by an ing modifier. Now, if this is a good modifier, then claiming it was merely reflecting would need to be describing the subject of the preceding clause. One side worried about impressionable children. Now, that side was claiming that it was merely reflecting the problems afflicting the nations, particularly in cities that were suffering from gang violence and police abuse. Now, this is strange. If you understand the context of the sentence, then you'll realize one side is referring to people like Mrs. Gore. Mrs. Gore is the one who's freaking out and saying, oh, think of the children. And so the problem here is Mrs. Gore is the one that's worried about impressionable children. She is not also defending hip-hop music, which is what the it's going to refer to. She's not defending hip-hop music as merely reflecting the problems of the nation, problems like violence. Remember, she's the one who's worried that rap music is going to cause more of these problems. So D is a little tricky. Grammatically, claiming could be correct. We could be modifying the subject over here. But contextually, when you read that sentence, you have to realize that the people claiming must not be the same people who are arguing that, rap music is terrible. The people who are making these claims that we describe over here must be the opposition, must be the people who are defending hip-hop music. And the only way to figure that out is to get some context. So 37 is a nice problem because it reminds us that we might be able to eliminate some things even without really reading very much. But to get a complete understanding of many problems in the SAT writing section, you have to get context as well as paying attention to your structure, your grammar rules and stuff like that. So good problem. Hopefully everybody took the time to eliminate A, B, and D, because when we eliminate things like D, we have an extra opportunity to review some of our important rules and really make sure that we're thoroughly solving these problems enough to actually learn new things as we move through the material. So make sure you're not just grabbing answers and saying, oh, C looks good. If you got this right and you didn't take the time to look at or eliminate D, you're missing a really important practice opportunity. So make sure that you're taking the time to be just as thorough as I'm being right now when I'm going over this stuff with you. Great. Anyway, let's move on. We have a couple of info flow questions here. This is a little unusual, but every now and then the test will give you 2 or 3 info flow for one paragraph. So fortunately, we've already done our reading pretty carefully. We read the first part of the paragraph about the controversy and how we've got these 2 sides. One side worrying about children being influenced by hip-hop music, and of course the other side arguing that hip-hop music merely reflects the problems afflicting the nation, especially the problems of cities where there are gangs and police abuse. Okay, so the question here is asking us to add a sentence with relevant details. Well, that's great. We're looking for a DS to illustrate the perspective at the end of the previous sentence. Well, that's super specific. So we know we're not looking for something that Mrs. Gore believes. We're looking for the thing at the end of the sentence. The people who are defending hip-hop and arguing that hip-hop is maybe reflecting problems rather than somehow causing problems. Well, okay. So the perspective at the end of the previous sentence is that hip-hop is reflecting the problems that exist in society rather than causing new ones. Relevant details, well, that's an important clue. I think once again, like we see in a lot of these RQ problems, we've got 2 clues to pay attention to. And I guess we could probably go through and just make sure that all of our answers are actually DS's. This is a DS. We learned in our reading classes, of course, that when things are in quotes, they're going to be details, not GS's, not general statements. B says many of these problems are, okay, what problems? We're being vague, we're being general. We are not providing details to illustrate anything. So B is out because we're looking for a DS and B is a GS. C says more recently, political movements like Black Lives Matter have convened to try to address some of those same problems. This is vague too. What problems? I thought we were supposed to provide details that illustrate the perspective. Now, this political movement here, I guess that's a detail. So we're going to have to ask, does this detail, does mentioning the Black Lives Matter organization or that movement, does that really illustrate the perspective that hip-hop merely reflects existing problems? You know, the more I go back and reread this section, the more I notice, well, hip-hop, is not even mentioned in choice C, is it? It's mentioning a response to the problems that we mentioned at the end of the previous sentence, but the question is not asking us to do that. It's asking us to illustrate the perspective at the end of the previous sentence, and the perspective at the end of the previous sentence is linking hip-hop with existing problems. So we sort of skimmed over A, didn't we? So let's actually read what A says, because maybe we're liking C a little too much because we don't have anything to compare it to. A said, as hip-hop artist David Banner put it, that's pretty specific, he's a hip-hop artist, hip-hop is sick because America is sick. Now that's interesting. I don't know if we're using slang here like sick, awesome. It doesn't seem like we are. I think we're being literal here. If hip-hop is sick, if hip-hop has messed up things in it, like Ms. Gore was complaining about, maybe that's because hip-hop is American music. So actually, that seems to be a rather pithy way of saying exactly this idea. This actually does a great job of illustrating, doesn't it? Illustrating the idea that we just mentioned. If you think this music is sick, well, maybe this music is about a sick place. Okay, so I really do like A. It seems to be what we're looking for. What about D? Illustrating the perspective. Well, wait a minute. This is giving us perspective of a completely different side. Another side pointed to the hypocrisy of criticizing black music for its vivid depictions of poverty, while ignoring the same content in white-dominated country music. Uh, well, yeah, that's not what we're looking for. We're introducing another argument rather than illustrating the perspective. So let's do what the question says. Let's use relevant details to illustrate the perspective. We like A, it's got to be our answer. Now, we spent so much time with this paragraph already that I have a feeling 39 is going to be pretty easy. We mentioned those hearings. Well, let's make sure we put this after we have introduced, oh, look at that, we've already circled it, congressional hearings. So one option would be after sentence 2. We're certainly not going to be able to put this thing after sentence 1 because we haven't introduced things yet. Let's just double check to see if C and D might somehow be better than the obvious answer, which is probably B. Could we put it after sentence 3? Those hearings raised all the usual disagreements about censorship. Wait a minute. The usual disagreements, that seems to be setting up sentence 3, which is telling us the sides in those disagreements. All right, no way that it's going to come after these. Sentence 2 is a perfect transition for setting up what we say in sentence 3 about one side and the other side. And in fact, that is a pretty cliche argument, isn't it? One group of people says, oh, think about the children, please. And then the other side maybe has a more nuanced and interesting defense. All right, so those are usual disagreements. Yeah, 39 is a pretty straightforward one. I don't think anyone's going to have a super hard time with that. Let's continue. Number 40 is also a pretty straightforward question. If and only if you know your lesson 12. Okay, so in lesson 12, remember we learned about the contrast if. Remember, we can use if kind of like the way we use but or although. That's what we're doing here. This is a pretty easy one to explain. If you just read your entire sentence, you'll see that the word although would work perfectly here. Although some of the most controversial rap music attempts to vividly portray violence and poverty in America's poorest communities, most marginalized communities, although some of the most controversial music attempts to portray violence in these bad communities, the vision in that music hasn't always been so bleak. Okay, so we're saying some controversial rap music is bleak, but rap music itself hasn't always been so bleak. Okay, so A is easy to eliminate because it's a run-on sentence. B, of course, is the answer. It should be, if you understand the sentence anyway, it should be easy to see that we need a but. There is a contrast in the two halves of this sentence. That's why the answer is the answer. For number 40, I was really just trying to test you on whether you remember some of those important rules in lesson 12 of your grammar pack. Let's continue. 41. In fact, the very first hip-hop music party organized by artists, well, that's a sentence fragment. Organized by artists hoping to help their New York neighborhood recover from a gang war. Okay, remember, if you have an ED word, it might be a verb, but not by itself if it's followed by the word by. We need something like is or was organized by. And it looks like we're going to be transitioning to talk about the past, the first hip-hop party. This is going to be some past event. So let's make sure we get something like was organized or were organized. And because our subject is singular, party, the answer is going to have to say was organized. There she is. There it is. Wonderful. That's what we're looking for. We get the tense right, and we don't have a sentence fragment like we have with A and D. Those are fragments. B is a tense error. Okay. Now, be careful. If any of you did pick B, probably what you were doing was you were skimming and you weren't getting enough context clues. We were using some present tense up here, but we're going to use past tense starting down here. And this sentence here in number 41 is setting up that transition to talk about the past, to talk about some history stuff. Okay, well, 42, I don't mind admitting to you that what I was really just doing was trying to break this paragraph in half to make it a little hard to see the parallelism between the time was X, the place was Y. That's what we're doing here. The year was 1972. The scene was the neighborhood in the Bronx. Now, I was trying to make this tricky for those of you who were focusing too much on the individual sentence and not enough on the surrounding context, particularly the context on the previous page. Choices like D really aren't that bad. In fact, the length is similar to C. But again, if you pick D, you're going to lose that beautiful parallel structure between this clause and what we had up here in the previous page. So parallelism is a good thing. It's what makes C better than D. B is out a little bit because of redundancy, I suppose. The scene was set where. But yeah, A and D are really not so bad. They're grammatically fine, but they don't have the nice elegant parallelism that we have in choice C. So if you haven't seen a problem like that before and you were wondering what to do, well, it's good to remember that for the College Board, parallel structure is better than not parallel structure. Okay. Let's get this wrapped up here. We've got a few more problems, and maybe you'll be grateful that I'm not going to rap this verse out loud for you. We don't have any more info flow questions. I think we did our info flow work already pretty good up here. All right, let's finish up. Number 43, let's read our sentence and get our clues. Wow, this is a long one. Let's see here. The so-called Hoe Avenue peace meeting lasted all day, comma, and the leaders eventually agreed to stop fighting, comma, direct their energies on community improvement, comma, and blank. Well, this is easy if we remember our methods from 9-2. A comma, comma, and sentence is going to force us to look at B first, and we can see that we've got this verb here, direct, and it looks like it's going to be parallel to stop, right? Stop and direct. You see, you could watch me with my mouse here kind of going back one word at a time, looking for something that matches direct, and I come up with stop. So the leaders eventually agreed to stop. The leaders eventually agreed to direct. And what do we need here? The leaders eventually agreed to no. All right, so we've got a parallelism error here. What we want is a verb right at the beginning here. Eventually, the leaders eventually agreed to regularly hold events. We love it, don't we? The leaders agreed to they held. No, that's not parallel. The leaders agreed to events were held. Okay, this is an easy question. This is a simple 9-2 parallelism question. If you need to review that method, look up the rule. Let's finish this. All right, number 44. Those events were often were dance and music parties. Okay, what events are we talking about here? The regularly held meetings, right, to bring young people together. So those events, those regular meetings, often were dance and music parties, and the music was, comma, of course, hip hop. Well, we saw something like this earlier in the set when we did, I think probably the first problem of this whole set has an S, V, comma, O problem. This is similar here. Hip hop is not actually a direct object, it's our subject complement, but let's ignore the grammar jargon for now and agree that we have an unnecessary comma. Now, if this of course thing is extra and unnecessary, then maybe it's okay for us to have 2 commas. Maybe it's okay for us to also have no commas. We're not going to pick D though for the same reason we're not picking A, but let's take a closer look at B versus C. The only real difference is the was and the is. Because we shouldn't have to worry about whether we need 2 commas or no commas. They're both probably fine. But we can see pretty quickly when we review our verb tense. Those events were dance parties and the music was, not is. We've got a verb tense error in C, so bye-bye C, bye-bye passage number 4. And if you want, you can look up your Grandmaster Flash and listen to some of the cheesiest hip-hop music ever recorded. You'll love it, I promise. Okay, that's it for passage 4 of set 1. That was fun. Yay.